A scout walks into the clearing. His hands are raised. His uniform is bloody. He is calling out in broken English, begging for a medic. Your platoon has been humping through triple canopy jungle since dawn. The heat is over 100 degrees. You are exhausted, you are afraid, and you are bound by the Geneva Convention to take this man prisoner. Two of your Marines step out of cover to do it, and the tree line opens up. RPD machine guns, AK-47s, a B-40 rocket. The man with his hands up drops flat and pulls the pin from a grenade he has been holding behind his back the entire time. In 30 seconds, your squad is gone. This is not a hypothetical. Some version of it happened hundreds of times between 1965 and 1971. It happened so often, and it killed so many Americans, that by the middle of the war, company commanders across South Vietnam were issuing a hard standing order that violated every instinct a soldier is trained to obey. Do not help the man with his hands up. Do not approach the wounded enemy. Treat every fallen body as a bomb until proven otherwise. The Viet Cong called it asymmetric warfare. International law calls it perfidy, and it is the reason that by the summer of 1968, a generation of American boys had unlearned the most fundamental impulse of human decency just to stay alive. Perfidy has a precise definition. You invite the protected status of the enemy, then you betray it. A white flag that hides a sniper, a red cross painted on an ammunition truck, a surrender that turns into a grenade. Under what would later be codified as Article 37 of the Geneva Conventions, these acts are war crimes. The Viet Cong used them constantly. They had to. The math of the war demanded it. The local force Viet Cong, the guerrilla in black pajamas operating out of the Chu Chi Tunnel Network, the Iron Triangle, and the Mekong Delta, was outgunned in every conventional metric. No close air support, no artillery to speak of, no armored divisions. What he had was the jungle, the tunnels, the patience to wait, and the willingness to weaponize the one thing the American GI could not switch off, the obligation to help his fellow man. The doctrine had a name, hugging the belt. You fight so close to the Americans that they cannot bomb you without bombing themselves. You fight so close that their artillery is useless. You fight so close that their helicopter gunships cannot fire. And inside that close fight, you turn their strengths into liabilities. Their medics, who must run toward casualties. Their corpsmen, trained to die before they let a Marine bleed out. Their officers, taught at West Point and Quantico that a prisoner is an intelligence source. You make all of that a kill mechanism. The tactics fell into four categories. The first was the feigned surrender. A Viet Cong soldier, or sometimes a planted civilian, would walk into a clearing with his hands up. Maybe wounded. Maybe carrying a Chu Hoi Safe Conduct Pass, the leaflets the American psychological warfare campaign had been airdropping by the millions to encourage defection. The moment American soldiers stepped out of cover to accept him, hidden machine guns in the tree line opened fire. The second was the feigned death, a body in a pile of casualties, apparently lifeless. Underneath that body, a hand grenade with the pin already pulled, the safety lever pinned in place by the corpse's own weight. Roll him over to check for a pulse. The lever releases. 4 seconds later, you and your medic are dead. The third was the booby-trapped corpse. Sometimes the body of an enemy fighter, sometimes the body of a South Vietnamese civilian, killed deliberately to bait a retrieval. On the 27th of October, the Viet Cong booby-trapped the corpse of a South Vietnamese People's Self-Defense Force member they had executed. When his relatives came to recover him, 4 of them were killed in the explosion.
The fourth was the secondary device. A first casualty, often from a small tripwire mine, was meant to wound, not to kill. Because a wounded man calls in a medevac, a wounded man brings his friends running into the open, and underneath the path his friends will take, the second, larger charge is waiting. Mines and booby traps accounted for 11% of all American combat deaths in Vietnam and 17% of all wounds between January 1965 and June 1970. The trap was not an accessory to the war. The trap was the war. To understand how the Viet Cong built that arsenal, you have to understand Cu Chi. The tunnel network beneath Cu Chi District ran for over 200 kilometers, 3 levels deep, hospitals, ammunition dumps, command bunkers, sleeping quarters, and workshops. The United States dropped roughly 7.5 million tons of ordnance on Vietnam during the war. A significant fraction of those bombs did not detonate. The Viet Cong sent specialized teams out to retrieve the duds. They dragged them, sometimes literally by hand, back to the tunnel workshops.
There, by candlelight, with hand tools, men and women cut the bombs open and extracted the high explosive. They used it to manufacture grenades, mines, and the toe popper booby traps that filled American hospitals. Explosions in the workshops were common. The people doing this work had a life expectancy measured in months, but it never stopped. In a brutal accounting of the war, the United States Air Force was the largest single supplier of Viet Cong munitions. The case that taught American Marines everything they needed to know about this kind of war happened on the 25th of February, 1968, just south of the Khe Sanh combat base. Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, was under siege. The siege had been running for nearly a month. Outside the wire, 3 North Vietnamese Army scouts were spotted moving through the brush. They were not hiding well. They appeared to be lost. A reinforced platoon of Bravo Company, led by 2nd Lieutenant Donald J. Jacques of Rochester, New York, was sent out to engage them. The scouts were bait. The Marines pushed roughly 700 meters south of the base perimeter. The North Vietnamese let them close to within 15 feet of a crescent-shaped ambush, spider holes, trench lines, concealed bunkers. Then the tree line opened up. The patrol was destroyed in minutes. 27 Marines were killed, either in the kill zone or in the immediate aftermath. The North Vietnamese moved through the wounded, executing them where they lay. Corporal Steve Weiss, the squad leader, survived by pulling a dead Marine's body over his chest and lying perfectly still while the enemy walked past him, finishing off his friends one by one. It took him the rest of the day to crawl 400 yards back to the wire. Private First Class Ronald L. Ridgway of Houston also played dead. He was captured rather than killed. He was declared killed in action. A funeral was held for him in his hometown, and an empty casket was buried in his name. He came home alive in 1973, after 5 years as a prisoner of war. The Marines killed that day lay in contested ground south of the base for 6 weeks. On the 30th of March, a recovery patrol tried to reach them. They were repulsed. 10 more Marines were killed in the attempt. Private First Class Donald R. Rash was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions that day. The bodies were finally recovered on the 6th of April. Many were unidentifiable after 6 weeks of exposure and shelling. 9 of them were buried together in a mass grave at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in Missouri. The Marines called this engagement the Ghost Patrol, a note for the historical record.
There is a common online claim that the bodies of those 27 Marines were booby-trapped by the North Vietnamese to inflict further casualties on any rescue attempt. That claim is not supported by primary sources. What is supported is the execution of the wounded, the loss of 10 more Marines in the recovery attempt, and the 6 weeks during which the patrol's friends had to lie in their bunkers and know exactly where their brothers were lying and exactly why they could not go get them. That was the lesson the survivors of Khe Sanh took home. The enemy will use your dead to kill your living. He will use your wounded as bait. He will let you advance into a kill zone because he knows that you have been trained as a matter of national character to take prisoners and to recover your fallen. He knows it because he has watched you do it, and he is counting on you to do it again. 3 months later, on the 16th of May, 1968, a Navy corpsman named Donald E. Ballard, attached to Company M, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, was working a casualty in Quang Tri Province. There had been a brief firefight. The enemy had broken contact. Marines were moving a wounded man back toward the landing zone. Ballard was with them. The fallen enemy bodies lay where they had dropped. One of them was not dead. The Medal of Honor citation describes what happened next in clean, declarative language. Quote, "An enemy soldier suddenly left his concealed position and, after hurling a hand grenade which landed near the casualty, commenced firing upon the small group of men." End quote. Ballard shouted a warning to the Marines. Then he threw himself on top of the grenade. It did not detonate. He lived. He came home. He received the Medal of Honor. This is the cleanest documented instance of a Vietnam-era feigned death grenade attack, and it tells you everything you need to understand about the Corpsman's War.
Of roughly 10,000 Navy hospital corpsmen who served alongside the Marines in Vietnam, 645 were killed in action. 3,300 were wounded. The man whose entire job was to run toward the fallen was the man most likely to be killed by a fallen man's grenade. By the middle of 1968, the response was hardening into doctrine. At the company level, the orders were specific. Never approach a surrendering enemy alone. Always have overwatch. 2 men minimum. Weapons trained. Crossfire angles. Frag the hole first. Before you enter a bunker, a tunnel, or a hooch, you roll a grenade in. Before you approach a body in the open, if the situation allows, you put a round into the dirt beside him to see if he flinches. Use a grappling hook and a rope to drag suspect bodies. Throw the hook. Take cover. Pull. If there is a grenade, a tripwire, or a pressure release wire underneath, it will detonate at the end of the rope, and not in your face. The 1st Marine Division formalized parts of this in Division Order P38 20.2A, dated the 1st of February 1969. The United States Army had been distributing the Handbook on Enemy Booby Traps since 1966, and at the same time, every American soldier in country carried 2 laminated cards in his pocket, the Geneva Convention card and the MACV-9 rules card. One of the rules, in plain English, read this way: treat the sick and wounded captive as best you can. The captive saved may be an intelligence source. In any case, he is a human being and must be treated like one. The American soldier in Vietnam was being told 2 things at once: trust no one and treat every prisoner as a human being. Reconcile that. You cannot. And that is the corrosion at the heart of this war. Philip Caputo, a Marine lieutenant who landed at Da Nang in 1965 and later wrote A Rumor of War, watched his company's mood turn savage within months.
The constant fear that a wounded enemy might lob a grenade from concealment. The constant fear that a smiling child might be carrying a satchel charge. It did something to men that no training had prepared them for. The logic of survival became the logic of dehumanization. If every wounded enemy is a possible bomb, the safest thing is to make sure he is no longer wounded. If every villager is a possible spotter, the safest thing is to clear the village. On the 16th of March 1968, just 19 days after the Ghost Patrol, soldiers of Company C, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry, 11th Brigade of the 23rd American Division, walked into a hamlet called My Lai. By the time they walked out, the official American estimate counted 347 Vietnamese civilians dead. The local count is 504, most of them women, children, and old men. Private First Class Fernando Simpson, who participated in the killings, said years later that he believed the villagers were all booby-trapped, that every body, every child, every grandmother was a bomb. He was wrong. But the pathway from a real enemy tactic to an indefensible American crime is exactly that short. The Geneva Convention assumes both sides are playing. Perfidy is a war crime. Denying quarter, executing the surrendering, killing the wounded is also a war crime. The Viet Cong's perfidy did not justify My Lai. Nothing did. But it explains without excusing how a chain of small, rational, survival-driven decisions can produce a moral catastrophe. When one side stops following the rules, the other side does not have the moral luxury of stopping with him. But he often does anyway. The men who survived this war came home carrying something they could not put down. Karl Marlantes, a Marine officer who fought in the same one corps where Ballard earned his medal, wrote later about the moral agony of a wounded enemy soldier, the man he could not bring himself to kill, the man he could not afford to save, the decision he had to make in a single second that would follow him for 50 years. Tim O'Brien, who served with the 23rd Infantry Division, lost his friend Kurt Lemon to a rigged device. He wrote about it. He kept writing about it. The tactic itself did not die in Vietnam. The improvised explosive device, the secondary blast aimed at first responders, the suicide bomber pretending to be wounded,
All of it found new ground in Iraq and in Afghanistan 30 years later. The trick is older than Vietnam, but the modern industrialization of it, the deliberate factory of dud bomb conversion in the Cu Chi tunnels, the deliberate weaponization of the rescue instinct on a national scale, is where the playbook of the next half-century got written. The order American soldiers received was real, even if it was never one single written sentence. It was 100 small briefings to 100 new replacements. It was a hard lesson, taught at the cost of someone else's life, that you pass down to the next man so that he might pass it down to the one who came after him. Do not approach the man with his hands up. Do not roll the body over to check. Do not run toward the wounded enemy without overwatch and without a rope. It was a rational order. It saved lives. It also cost them something else, something that does not show up in the casualty figures. 27 Marines died south of Khe Sanh on the 25th of February 1968. Their remains came home 6 weeks later, in unidentifiable pieces, to a mass grave in Missouri. And every Marine who survived that war learned not to help the man with his hands up. Some of them spent the rest of their lives trying to remember what it had felt like to want to.